tripurantako bhavatu va brahma surendrodhava bhanurva shashalakshanota bhagavan buddhota siddhota va ragadvesha visharati moharahitas sattvanukampodhyato Yasarvai saha samskrito gunaganais tasmai namah sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings, and who is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So I'm very happy to be here this morning. Good morning to all of you. Very good to see so many familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces, but I should say unknown faces, but not unfamiliar. Everyone looks familiar. Thanks. Thank you, Mark. Glad to see so many people. Swami Dhyana Yoganandaji asked what I wanted to do, if he wanted me to give an introduction, and I said no, not necessary, because though some of you don't know me, still it feels like being introduced to my mother and father. No need for an introduction. It's so good to see all of you. I'm scheduled today to give a spiritual talk. So I imagine that it was the title that attracted all of you. I was asked when I was still in India for titles for my talks in Southern California, and I said, I don't have any titles now. I can't even think about that. So please just put a spiritual talk, something general for all of them, and then I'll decide at the time. So I didn't decide till this morning what I would speak about. And my situation reminds me of a story I heard from the Swami under whom I joined many years ago in Chicago. I joined the order, that is, back in 1969. He had been first an assistant to Swami Nikhilananda in New York when he came from India. And so he used to tell us that when he first came from India, Swami Nikhilananda told him, after he'd been there for a couple of months and had his feet on the ground, said that, well, now in a couple of months you have to give your first talk, and we have to publish the bulletin, so you must give me a title. And Swami said, 2 months, what I'll want to speak on, how do I know now? I have no idea what I'm going to feel like speaking on in 2 months. And so Swami said, well, this is a formality. You give an interesting sounding title now, and in 2 months you speak on whatever you like. I didn't feel easy doing that, so I thought it's easier just to say spiritual talk and then speak about anything that I like, and hopefully it'll come somewhere within the realm of spiritual talk. Try for that. And just recently I was with Native American elders in Moab, Utah, which was actually the reason for my visit to America. This trip in Southern California is piggybacking on the grace of those who invited me to Moab and paid for my travel to the States and back to India. And there with the Native Americans, those who are traditional elders, as these people were, most of them were traditional elders. There they don't believe in schedules, they don't believe in planning things ahead, so the organizers who were the people that I knew that invited me to speak with the Native American elders, who are not themselves Native American, they, as always, sent out an agenda for the meetings over 3 days. And the agenda said, first meeting, a morning session, agenda to be discussed. Second meeting to be decided, third meeting to be decided, fourth meeting to be decided. Everything was to be decided. So I liked that. Last time when I came, some of you saw me in October when I was here very briefly. I had been invited for a meeting that time in Northern California at a Tibetan Buddhist retreat in a remote part of Northern California. And I only had 6 days for Southern California, and Swami Sarvadevananda had me 1 day in each place and a lecture in each place. And so at that time he had asked me for titles when I was still in India, and I was foolish enough to give titles. And I regretted it the whole time I was in Southern California, because I couldn't think of anything to speak of on the topics, and I didn't want to speak on the topics. And so anyway, I decided this time I'm not going to do that. I'm going to learn from my Native American elders and just say, I'm just going to talk on something. So this morning I did come up with a topic, and I even put down some notes, and Dhyana Yogananda Swami was kind enough to print them out for me, just to give me some sort of structure to keep me in line. So I decided to speak about self-effort and surrender, or surrender and self-effort, or self-effort and grace, as you like. I generally like to speak on topics where there's some variety within the topic itself, rather than talking on one limited topic with a limited approach, but to see that to a topic which has some diversity that will perhaps serve the needs of different types of people. Some people emphasize in their lives the path or self-effort. And speaking of spiritual people, people on a spiritual path. Some people emphasize the path of self-effort, and some people emphasize the path of surrender, of grace. And some people combine the two. And so I thought that, well, that will give me a spectrum of ideas to speak on. And also this morning, as I tried to think of something to speak about, I was a complete blank. And so I thought, well, I've just got to surrender and just to find something to say. And I thought, oh, surrender, that's a good topic. So that's what you get. So one of the great tensions in spiritual life is between self-effort and surrender. That is, the need to do something. We come to spiritual life, we ask about learning meditation or learning other spiritual practices, spiritual attitudes and so forth. We want to learn something that I can do in order to follow a spiritual life. And at the same time, many of us recognize that all egocentric doing is sort of undoing what I'm trying to do. That is, to attain to that which is beyond the ego. So on the one hand, we need self-effort. We need to do something. If you come to me or to someone to ask about spiritual life and say, I want to lead a spiritual life, and you just say, okay, just to surrender. And well, surrender to whom, surrender how do I surrender? We need something to do. We need something that I can take in hand and actually do. Just to say, okay, surrender. That's like coming to a teacher and saying, well, I want to learn how to meditate. Okay, meditate. So that doesn't help much. So we want to do something, and yet eventually we learn as we go, we learn that in spiritual life what we're supposed to do is to attain to the infinite, and the ego can't do that. Self-striving can't attain to the infinite. Whether you think in terms of God, or whether you think in terms of the impersonal, the self, that I want to realize the self, I want to realize who I am, my infinite being, which is one with the universe, I want to realize that. Well, you can't realize it by doing something, because that's beyond all effort. And yet, we have to do something. I want to realize God. Well, God will realize you. But we want to do something because we recognize that if I don't do anything, that's what I'm doing already, and I'm stuck in this mess as it is. So I want to get out of the mess. So how do I get out of it? So again, it's one of the paradoxes. I won't say a contradiction because it's not really contradictory. It's a logical contradiction, but a psychological truth and a spiritual truth, that we're in this situation, that we need strenuous effort, and we also need to give up the ego, which is the very basis of making any effort to do anything. So that is one of the great paradoxes in life, spiritual life. And it's also a paradox because self-surrender itself requires tremendous self-effort. You have to practice self-surrender. If you want to emphasize self-surrender rather than self-effort, you find that you have to expend tremendous self-effort in order to surrender. And so that also is a paradox. So it's that I want to speak about today. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, you find this intention expressed very well in the Gita. Sri Krishna begins his instruction to Arjuna. Arjuna, in the first chapter of the Gita, is facing the opposing army. He's come to the battlefield to fight. Sri Krishna is his charioteer, as you see in the back painting on the wall. Sri Krishna is the charioteer who brings the chariot out onto the battlefield. Arjuna sees the opposing battle arrayed in front of him, and he thinks, these are people that I know, that I'm supposed to fight with and kill. These are my elders. These are my teachers, those that I revere more than anyone. Some of them are my family members. In fact, the head of the opposing army was his cousin brother. In India, cousins are considered brothers, and so you often hear in India people talking about my cousin brother. And so these were cousin brothers. He and the 98 others of the Kauravas, Duryodhana. And so he's fighting against relatives that were dear to him. He's fighting against his teachers, his revered elders, which means a lot more in India, ancient and even modern to some extent, than it does in the West. To have a teacher in anything, if you take a teacher in music, if you take a teacher in art, in dance, they're treated like a guru. And one comes to them with great humility and with great respect, and you offer yourself to them. In fact, there are examples in modern times, in the 20th century, of great great Indian musicians, North Indian classical musicians, who were Hindu Brahmins, who went to a Muslim musical ustad, a Muslim teacher, and they became like a family to the teacher. They surrendered themselves completely to the teacher, and they became Muslim just in order to identify with the teacher. They converted to Islam in order to surrender completely to the teacher. Not that the teacher wanted to convert them. It wasn't a matter of conversion, forced or unforced, but it was a question of surrendering to the teacher. So in India, the teacher is regarded so highly. So Arjuna saw his teachers, those who had taught him warfare, those who had taught him the skills of a kshatriya, a warrior, and a king on the opposing side. And he lost heart and thought, no, I can't fight them. How am I to fight those whom I revere so highly, who are more important to me than my own life is? Better that I surrender myself and that I give up here on the battlefield. Better that I beg my food rather than to cause the bloodshed of those whom I revere. And so he goes on in his arguments why it is that he should not fight, why it is that he should give up. So this is considered an allegory of life, the allegory of our own lives that we face every day. We may not be on such a dramatic field of battle, but life itself is our field on which we have to face choices, difficult choices many times. And so when Arjuna collapses, as he has in the painting in the back, he collapsed in the chariot. In fact, unless you know what you're looking at, you don't even see Arjuna because he's so collapsed into the chariot. Then Sri Krishna begins his instruction, and he begins with a call to manliness to Arjuna. He says, Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupastitam anarya jushtam aswargyam akirti karma Arjuna. Whence has come upon you, O Arjuna, this weak faint-heartedness in the midst of this battle? And then he says that you stand up and fight. Give up this weak faint-heartedness and stand up and fight. And so the Gita begins with that heroic charge. And Swami Vivekananda used to say that that was the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. In the Gita, they're the most beautiful spiritual teachings about the nature of reality, about the nature of the self, the Atman, the nature of God, the nature of the universal self, the nature of devotion, the nature of knowledge, and so forth. And yet Swami Vivekananda said these first two verses are the very essence of the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna calls to Arjuna to give up this weakness and to face that which is his duty, and that is, this duty has brought him to the point where he has to fight. So again, this is considered an allegory of life, where many times we face difficulties in life and we just want to give up. And many times in spiritual life, we think that that giving up is surrender. But no, we have to face the brute, as Swami Vivekananda said. We have to face the brute. He used to tell the story of himself when he was in Benares in North India. He went to the famous Durga temple on the outsides of Benares, on the outside edge of Benares, still there. And in his day, as well as now, there are these large langurs, monkeys. In India, there are several types of monkeys, mainly the langurs and the Hanuman monkeys, the red-faced and black-faced monkeys. The black-faced monkeys are langurs, and they're much bigger. And langurs generally are shy. The Hanumans are smaller, but they're much more aggressive and much more clever. But langurs, if they get used to people, as they do in a city like Benares, then they become very aggressive. And so these langurs were large monkeys and very aggressive. So Swamiji was going to do what they call pradakshina, that is circumambulation of the Durga temple. So he started walking around the temple. Suddenly this band of langurs comes chasing after him. And they come at him very aggressively. And I've seen langurs that are very aggressive. They bare their teeth. And I've seen langurs attack dogs, and they tear the dogs to pieces. They just tear the flesh right off of them. And so they're simple. They're not cute, cuddly monkeys. They're serious monkeys. So Swami Vivekananda saw them running after him with their teeth bared, ready for fight. And so Swamiji started running. But he couldn't outrun them, of course, even though he was a young man and athletic at that time. And so as he was running and they were gaining on him, he heard a sadhu call out and said, "Face the beast, face the beast." And so Swamiji stopped and turned around. And when he turned around and faced the langurs, then they backed off. They were still thinking about how to get him, but they weren't going to face him when he was facing them. They weren't going to attack when they were facing him. And so then finally they backed off, and Swamiji was able to get out. So he used to say, learn to face the brute. That is, face the problems of life. Don't run from them. That all of the problems in life are really like the langurs. When we run from them, they chase after us. When we face them, we find that within us is the strength to face down everything. Within us is the strength to face down everything. We have to have that strength and that courage to face it. All of you here are old enough, even the youngest of you here, are old enough to have seen that in your own lives. And so many times in life we find problems in front of us that we think, oh, this is too big for me. This is going to do me in. I remember in my own childhood, so many times I thought I was in a dangerous situation that I would never get out of, and yet I'm still here. And so, if we face the problems in life, we find that we can face them down. So that's self-effort. That's self-effort. So the Gita says that, but then in the last chapter of the Gita, Sri Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Give up all dharmas. That means give up all of your ideas, all of your practices. Give up everything to me and take refuge in me, that I will save you from everything. There's no fear if you surrender to me. So at the beginning of the Gita, Sri Krishna says, face the brute, basically. Face the problems of life. Your life has brought you to this point on the battlefield. Now is not the time to run. Now you have to face the battle, which is your karma. Even knowing that it's going to bring death and destruction. And it did. It didn't bring Arjuna's death, but it brought death to everything that was dear to him. It was a terrible battle. The great war of the Mahabharata, the ancient war. But Sri Krishna said that now you can't run from it. Everything in your life has brought you here. Others are dependent upon you, so you can't turn and run. And so that's the way the Gita begins, and then Sri Krishna gives much beautiful teaching, and then he ends by saying that give up all dharmas, that is, give up everything, and take refuge in me. Now, give up everything there doesn't mean give up physically like a monk, renounce the world as a monk. That's what Arjuna wanted to do rather than face the fight. But so he didn't mean that, but he meant give up all of your idea of self-effort, give up all idea of doing things, give up all idea of good and bad and all of that. Surrender to me, and I will take care of everything. And so you have these two contradictory ideas at the beginning of the Gita and coming at the end of the Gita. So again, the paradox of spiritual life between self-effort and surrender. Because as I'll say in a moment, even those following the path of knowledge practice surrenders, just of a different type from those on a path of devotion. So first, let me say some more words about self-effort. Why self-effort is something that even those practicing surrender have to do. First of all, why self-effort? Why not just effort? Well, self-effort, because you have to do it for yourself, of course, first of all. It's individual effort. Even if you work in the midst of other people, work conjointly with other people, you still have to exert self-effort, that is, effort from yourself. And all effort really is self-effort, but self is used also for emphasis, to emphasize this fact, that it's something that comes from you. You have to take responsibility. You have to do it intentionally. It has to come from you, not from somebody else telling you what to do. And also it's to distinguish self-effort from mechanical activity. Machines work, machines do all kinds of things, and natural forces do all sorts of things, but that's not effort. Effort indicates that I'm doing something with intentionality, and I'm doing something which is coming from a conscious, intentional self. That is, it's coming from a person, whether a human or an animal or whatever type of being, but it's coming from a self. So that's why self is used for emphasis, to distinguish it from mechanical activity and natural forces that are working, and to say that this is intentional and is coming from a self-aware being. So that's part of the definition of self-effort, or that's intrinsic to the idea of self-effort. So who is the self that acts? We say self-effort, who is the self that acts? Well, for one thing, I've already explained that, or already said, that it's a self-conscious being. Effort comes from someone who is self-aware. It knows that I am. That goes for all of us, except for when we're in deep sleep. Even when we're dreaming, we have the sense that I am, and that I'm doing things in the dream. And in waking state also, we have the sense that I am and I do. I'm what's called in Sanskrit, you don't need to know the Sanskrit, but it's called in Sanskrit karta, that is an agent, agentship. So I am self-conscious, I'm aware that I am, and I act out of that. And so everything that we do comes from that. And we find that throughout life, throughout the day and throughout the night, we are acting, we are performing self-effort. You came here this morning, you had to exert yourselves to come here. You had to exert self-effort. First of all, you had to exert self-effort, no matter how much you didn't want to get out of bed. You might have had the help of an alarm clock to wake you up, so that was a mechanical force that woke you up. But then you had to say, okay, now I've got to get out of bed. And so you had to exert self-effort. You had to go, if you're a coffee drinker, you had to go and make your coffee. You had to get your breakfast. You had to get in the car. You had to drive here. You had to find a seat. You had to sit down. And now you have to listen. Unless you're one of those blessed people that can easily fall asleep, and then you don't have to worry about listening. So all of that takes self-effort. All takes self-effort. So self-effort comes from a self-conscious being, somebody who knows that I am. And it comes with intentionality. Now I have to do this. Whether I want to or not, I have to do this. So self-awareness and intentionality are central to the fact of self-effort. So the self that strives is an individual being, whether human or animal. Of course, human is one type of animal. Anything that is self-conscious. And we have to have the sense of agency that I can do. Assuming that plants and trees are self-aware also. In fact, there have been modern experiments to show that they are self-aware, but in a very different sense from the way that humans and animals are. But assuming that plants also are self-aware, then they also have a sense of self-direction. Not in movement, because if you're a rooted plant, you can't move very much. You can turn your leaves towards the sun, etc. And that also seems to be a mechanical process, or an automatic process, or an instinctive process. But wherever there's self-awareness, there's the sense of agentship, that is, that I can do. Again, the doing of a plant is very different from the doing of an animal, but still that must be there if there is self-consciousness. So the sense of agency itself is interesting. To be an agent, to be someone who does, we have to have the sense of free will. Machines don't have any sense of free will. Swami Vivekananda gave the beautiful illustration, and he presented it very poetically. I can't do justice to what he said, but in one of his California lectures, and I think it was in Southern California, I think it was in Los Angeles, he said, look at the powerful locomotive going down the tracks. And on the track of the train, there's a little worm. Now the worm is small, so vulnerable, so easily squished, that it doesn't take a locomotive to squish it. It can easily be squished by many, many things much, much, much smaller than a locomotive. So easily, so vulnerable, so easily wiped out from life. And the locomotive is huge, gigantic, this big piece of metal. So much power, so much energy is there. And the train is rolling down the tracks at full speed, and the worm is on the tracks, and it feels the vibration on the tracks. And so it makes an effort to get off of the tracks, feeling the vibration. He said, in that, the worm is far superior to the locomotive. The worm is far superior, because it can move off of the tracks because it feels the need to, whereas the train goes only where it's directed by others. The train has no self-motivation. It's just mechanical force. And so the worm, which is so vulnerable, is far greater than the locomotive, which is so powerful, so big, so huge, and potentially so destructive. So in that is agentship. In the agentship, there has to be the sense of free will that I can do. If I think I can't do, I don't do. It's the sense that I can do something that gives us, that distinguishes us from mechanical forces and just non-conscious natural forces like the wind and so forth. So agentship shows a tremendous power, that is the power to act, the power to decide and to do. And yet, if you study the teachings of spiritual teachers around the world of different traditions, including Swami Vivekananda, who said that ability to choose to get off of the track was what distinguished the worm from the locomotive. Even Swami Vivekananda said that there's really no such thing as free will. There's no such thing really as free will. But without the sense of freedom, we can't act. So again, one of the strange paradoxes in life. How do we know that there's no free will? Well, of course, great sages who have transcended the ego sense and the sense of limited individuality and the individual will have seen it. But you know, that we just have to take, we can either take or reject their statement, but they claim that they've seen it, and people of different traditions have said the same thing. That for those who like God talk, that is, who like a theocentric view of the universe, a God-centered view of the universe, they say that everything happens by the will of God. And for those who prefer an impersonal viewpoint, both of which are considered true in Vedanta, they're just two different ways of looking at the same thing. Those who like the impersonal viewpoint, then it's the the movements of nature that cause things to happen. But how do we know that there's not really ultimately free will? Because of the simple examples will at least indicate it. You come to me with, and some of you have heard me say this before because it's an easy example, you come to me with 2 ice cream cones. One is chocolate and one is vanilla. And you say, Swami, which do you want? And I think, gee, what do I feel like today? I think I'll take the chocolate. And I feel that I have made an option as a free agent, that was my free will. But if you knew everything about me, everything that was going on in my mind, and the fact that yesterday I had had more vanilla than I wanted, and so today the option of chocolate is there, you would know that obviously he's going to choose chocolate. So I feel like I'm choosing chocolate because I want to. But that very wanting is determined by other factors. And so it's not really free will. It's not really free will. So we're caught in this situation where we can't act without feeling free. And yet, if we really examined why we're doing the things we do, we find that they're determined by other factors, within us and without us. And so this is a very strange situation. So Vedanta says, and this was part of the a long-term argument within Christian theology about free will versus predestination, for instance, and also questions about individual free will within a more restricted sphere as well. And this debate has gone on in different systems of philosophy and theology, and also within modern science about how much free will is there. Science seems to indicate that everything is determined, meaning that there is no free will. And so Vedanta again says that ultimately there is no free will, and yet without the sense of freedom, then life loses its meaning, and we can't even follow a spiritual life. If you have no choice to come here and try to pursue a spiritual life, then you're just a machine. You're not going to do it. So how to solve that strange paradox? Vedanta says that both are true. The sense that I am free is true, and also the sense that I am bound is true. Both are true. It's just that the sense of freedom that we have, that we all have, and that is at the very center of our being, that's a true intuition. It's just that we have misplaced it. We have just misplaced it. They say that our nature is free, and that's why we think that we are free. And also that true nature of ours, which is the divine awareness which we are, the divine self, the Atman, that which is our true nature, that which is one with the universe, and that which is our very self, which is one with the divine, that is constantly shining through the mind and the senses, giving us the sense of freedom, the memory of ultimate freedom. And so even in the midst of our present bondage, that freedom is there. We are free. It's just that our freedom is not in making choices, little choices. And that's important to recognize also, because in modern times we think that I'm free because I have so many choices. I can go to the grocery store and there's a whole wall of packaged cereals. And I can choose anything I want, from great grains to shredded wheat to Choco, whatever it is, Choco Puffs or whatever it is, to Fruit Loops, from the healthy to the extremely unhealthy, etc. And I think that, I'm free because I have so many choices. I remember once when I was in San Diego many years ago, living in San Diego, running the center there, we had the Soviet Festival in San Diego. This was, I think, in 1987 or 88. Actually, no, it was 1989. It was a huge event organized by the city of San Diego, and it was during Glasnost and Perestroika when they were trying to improve relationships between America and Russia, and Gorbachev was the premier in Russia. And so San Diego had this Soviet festival in which they invited the greatest artists and performing artists and visual artists, all types of art, musicians, all types of artists to San Diego for 3 weeks. And I was invited to participate also as a religious representative. It was a grand event. And so one of my friends, at that time he was Father Egan. He was the Catholic priest at the mission, San Diego Mission, the old mission church. He was host to the Minister of Culture in Russia. The Soviet minister, not of a republic, but of the whole Soviet Union, Minister of Culture. So he stayed with Father Egan during this 3-week period. And Father Egan told me that he decided, what shall I show him to, give him an experience of American life? So he showed him many things, of course, but one of the things he thought, let me take him to Home Depot. And one of the other things he decided to do was to take him to a grocery store, so to show him the American shopping experience. Shop until you drop. So he took him, and in the grocery store, this Minister of Culture said, my God, in Russia, here, you have more choices for dog food than we have for human food in Russia. And so again, in the modern world, we think that options and making choices is freedom. No, the ability to make choices is important. I'm not saying that the ability to make choices should be taken away. As Swamiji said, the worm crossing the track had the choice to get off of the track, which the locomotive did not have. That choosing to get off of the track shows self-awareness, shows self-direction. And because we have that, we are not machines. And so again, that's a great thing. But if you look deep into if you could look deep into the workings of the worm's mind, however small it might be, however limited it might be, and we don't really know, not being worms, most of us, we don't know what it's thinking, but if we could know everything about the worm, we would see that it was directed by forces to get off of the tracks. Yes, it was conscious, it was making a decision, but that decision itself was directed by circumstances, and so it wasn't really free. It wasn't really free. So again, we're in this strange situation where we have a sense of freedom which allows us to act, which machines don't have, and yet if you really look at what we decide, what we're deciding is determined by other things, and yet that light of freedom is shining even there, and that's why that's important. It's because we have the ability to make choices that we grow. It's because we have the ability to make choices that I can say, no, I have these habits that have been destructive for me. I want to get over them. Let me get over these destructive habits. It's because I have the ability to choose that I can say, no, my life is without meaning. I want to find a meaningful life. Let me find a way to have a meaningful life. So again, if I could look deep into your mind, or if someone could look deep into your mind, they could say, well, they decided it for this, that, and the other factor. But still you make that decision. Still you make that decision because the light of freedom is shining through you. It's that light of freedom which is our awareness itself. And it's that which keeps us from being machines. And so we have to make self-effort. Without self-effort, we can't even practice surrender. So again, this to be an agent means that we have to have a sense of free will. We have to have the ability to choose. And so that sense of freedom is true, it's just misplaced. And so the fact is that we can't act without that sense of freedom. And yet in our choices we find that we're choosing because of factors that we have no control over. Those factors are directing our choices. So again, the strange situation we find ourselves in as far as acting as agents within this world. Now let me speak a little bit about surrender, and then I'll speak about the two before I close. So again, the other side is surrender, and Sri Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Give up all other considerations and surrender yourself to me alone. Christ says, come all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So he tells us that his cross is easy to bear. Come and take up my cross. It's easy to bear. Come all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That also we recognize the call of that, the beauty of the call of that. And we all want that. We can strive and we can do and we can seek and all of that, but times come when we think, I've done so much, I've striven so much, and yet I haven't gotten very far. If only there was someone who could take my burden. If there were only someone who could lift my burden. We have friends in life. We have partners in life, husbands and wives and partners. and others whom we love dearly and who are very dear to us and who help us in many ways. But where's the person who can actually lift my burden? Where's the person who can actually take the burden off of my shoulders, as Christ promised, as Sri Krishna promised, as Sri Ramakrishna promised as well, as all great teachers have promised. So my cross is heavy and my burden is light. That beautiful saying of Christ. So where is the person who can take that? So there's the path of surrender in spiritual life also. So again, the idea of self-effort is there in spiritual life, and also the possibility of surrender. As I said, some people emphasize one more than the other, but both of them are there. So what is the logic behind the idea of surrender, self-surrender, as opposed to self-effort? As I said a little while ago, those on the path of knowledge, what we call jnanis, they follow surrender, and those on the path of devotion, that is, those who are God-centric, they also follow surrender. It's more easy to understand those who follow the path of God, who seek the beloved, the divine beloved, that they surrender to God. That's a traditional practice in all God-centric religious paths, including Vedanta, which has its God-centric path and the impersonal path, both which are equally true, equally good. So to surrender to God is easy to understand. That God is the director of the universe. I'm conscious of my little life, but I don't know how the sun rises. I don't know how the plants grow. I don't know so many things. I have a little knowledge. I can work all of my life. If I'm very intelligent, I can work all of my life and expand my knowledge a little bit. And still I know so little. Even a Newton and an Einstein, they said towards the end of their lives that I'm just playing with pebbles as Newton said, I'm just playing with pebbles on the seashore of the ocean of knowledge. Sir Isaac Newton, the great founder of modern physics, the discoverer of the principle of gravitation, he discovered gravity. People discovered that when they first fell to the ground. But he discovered it as a principle that could be scientifically and mathematically expressed. Such a great scientist, he said, I'm just playing with pebbles on the seashore of the ocean of knowledge. And Einstein said the same. And once when Einstein was writing about the limitations of Newtonian physics, then he stopped and said, I don't remember how he expressed it very beautifully and with some pathos, that no, let me stop. In criticizing the great Newton, I recognize that I myself know so little. I know so little, just a little tiny spark of light in the vast ocean of darkness. And so on the path of devotion, we recognize that I have some power to do, I have some power to know, and yet in the vast ocean of the universe, how little is my power to do, so little is my power to know. I have some power to love other people, and how little is my power of love. How little is the spark of love I have within me. I can expand it, I can include more and more people, I can in general way try to include the whole world, and yet how small is my spark of love when I am confronted with the ocean of love which is the divine being. And so surrender means surrender of myself to that, to the source of all wisdom, to the source of all love, to the source of all power, who is, in Vedantic thinking, and not just thinking, but Vedantic experience, direct experience, who is the very life of my life. For us, God is not someone out there who's doing things with us, that he's making things happen down here. God is within each one of us. My experience is the experience of God. Your experience is the experience of God. My doing is the doing of God. But we, as it was said by one of Ramakrishna's disciples, Swami Atmarupananda, we are like pens in the hand of a writer. And the pen thinks, oh, I've written so many beautiful letters. In fact, I even once wrote a book, and that book became quite famous. And yet they didn't credit me at all, and yet I was the one who wrote it. I've done so many wonderful things, and yet it's just a pen, and it doesn't recognize it. We are in the same situation. We are in the same situation. We are pens in the hand of God, and yet we take credit. The ego takes credit for that which the ego has no right over. For an example, I'm standing here speaking. How do I speak? I don't have any idea. You have no idea. The greatest scientist, the one who studies the physiology of speech and all of that their whole life, they have no idea how we speak. They're just mapping different muscles. This has to move, that has to move. When I'm speaking, first of all, there's the physical part. Do I know how to move the muscles in my throat and to expand and contract my vocal cords? I have no idea. How sometimes my voice rises and sometimes it goes down. I can do it, but how do I do it? I just think, okay, let me do it. And it happens. I'm not doing it. There's so many things that are happening. The movements of my mouth, my lips, my tongue, the regulation of breath, again, the regulation of the vocal cords, and all of that. If I think about it a little bit, then I have to stop speaking because I get so confused. I feel like I'm getting dizzy. I don't know how I talk. I thought when I was down there that, well, let me walk up and it's time to give a talk now. How did I walk up here? I have no idea. No one knows how. There's so many things going on. The movement of muscles within my legs, the sense of balance and so forth, the swinging of my arms to maintain balance and so forth. I have no idea how I do it. I just do it. If I have a stroke, that power can be taken out immediately. Then physiotherapist, if I have enough power in the brain left to relearn it, physiotherapists help me relearn it. I learn how to walk, but even how I learn how to do it, I don't know. And physiotherapists don't really know. They know what you do and what you show a person, so that suddenly they're able to begin to do it. But the doing of it, we don't know how we do it. And yet I say, I'm going to walk up there and I'm going to give a talk. I don't know how I talk. I just mentioned the physical parts. What about the translation of my ideas in my mind into speech? How do I do that? I don't know. Where do the ideas come from that I'm speaking? I have no idea. None of us have any idea. All of this is going on, and yet I think, oh, I'm going to give a lecture. And afterwards people either say, oh, that was the worst talk I ever heard, or Swami, that was pretty good. It was all right. It was all right. And I think if they say it's all right, then I think, oh, I did pretty well. I did pretty well today. I don't know how I did it. It just happens. I can't take credit for it. We can't take credit for any of the things we do. If we actually saw, it's the ego which is an imposter that says that I am responsible for all of these actions. So the devotee, the one who follows the path of God, the path of seeking for the beloved God, then they understand that. First understand it, that I don't know how I do anything, and so I can't take credit for anything. So let me make an act of surrender to God. Let me think that I'm surrendering myself to God. Let me try to be like a pen in the hand of God who is writing my life out. My life is being written by God using this pen. And I surrender myself to Him, this ego sense, because I have nothing to do with it. I don't even know what's going on. I don't understand any of it. But I know through the testimony of countless saints and great people, men and women, that God is the embodiment of love. There also in Vedanta, we say that we have to clarify our idea of God if we want to follow this path. God is not a judge. God is not sitting in heaven somewhere looking down on you and judging the quick and the dead, judging the innocent and the guilty. No, God is not waiting to strike you with a lightning bolt because you did something He didn't like. No, we have to give up all of those ideas of God. God is infinite love itself. God is infinite knowledge itself, infinite awareness itself, infinite existence itself. This whole ocean of existence in which we are all waves is what God is. Everything here is vibratory by nature. Everything can be reduced to vibrations of different types in different mediums. And the medium itself can be reduced to vibration, and that is reduced to vibrations within the medium of existence itself. The basic existence, the isness of everything, and that's the isness of God. So we're not separate from God. God is not a judge looking down on us, waiting to see if we're doing what He likes and doesn't like. No, God is the ocean of love, the ocean of knowledge, the ocean of consciousness, the ocean of existence, which we are parts of. We are waves in that ocean. And the wave is nothing but water itself. And so we're nothing but God. We're nothing but God, nothing but parts of God. But as long as we have a sense of individuality, I feel that I'm a part of God. I'm a wave in the ocean of God's ocean. I'm a wave in the ocean of God, God's being. And eventually we realize that as water, I'm one with God. There's no distinction. You can't distinguish one part of the ocean from another except spatially. And in God, there's no space. So, surrender has that psychology that let me surrender to God. And in the path of knowledge, one surrenders to the self. One surrenders to the self. That is, I am awareness. I know myself as awareness. All of us have the sense of I am. And so in the path of knowledge, you seek to know, who am I? I know that I am, and I think I'm Swami Atmarupananda. I've got this body. I was born in Atlanta, and I grew up in different places, and I live now in India, and so forth. I think that that's who I am. No, that's not who I am. So let me find out who the I am is, and I begin to discover that the I am is of the nature of self-awareness, consciousness. So then I surrender to that. I don't do anything. Doing is done by the forces of nature, by Prakriti, by this mysterious power of nature. Everything is happening. I think that I'm the agent, but I'm not the agent. And so I surrender the sense of being the doer, and I try to be the witness, the sakshi. I try to be the witness of all activity and give up the sense that everything depends upon me. So both of them, my time is up now, but let me just conclude. Both of these paths of surrender in the path of knowledge and surrender in the path of devotion, both of them require wisdom to practice them. Because if you just say, well, I'm going to give up the sense of doing and I'm not going to do anything, I'll wait for God to do things, well, then after a while you get hungry and you think, well, this is ridiculous, I got to go get a meal. No, so you continue to act, continue to live the way that you're living, continue to do the things that you have to do. But in the midst of that, again, in ways appropriate to the path of knowledge or ways appropriate to the path of devotion, there's not time to develop those two different ways, but in general, for speaking for both paths, in general, you do the things that you're doing, but you do them with a sense of surrender, with a sense of surrender. Let me just say, to make it less abstract, on the path of devotion, if you're seeking God, on the path of devotion, I surrender to God, and so I have to do something, but let me do it prayerfully. Let me pray to God for guidance. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's best. I don't know if I should take this job or should reject it. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. I don't know what to do. You please guide me. I have to make a decision, so if I don't hear your voice, I have to make a decision, but may that decision be the right decision. You guide my action so that it's the right decision. So you do everything with this sense of surrender. You pray for guidance, you pray for light, you pray for the ability to surrender. And so again, you're exercising self-effort in the midst of surrendering. So the two are not contradictory. You have to do something to surrender. Eventually, we come to the point where we have surrendered totally, and then there's no more self-effort. But then we are realized souls. Then we are what one tradition calls a saint, another tradition calls a sage, another tradition calls an enlightened being. But until that, we practice surrender. We do it through self-effort. But my self-effort is directed towards realizing that self-effort is, I'm making an effort to surrender self-effort. I'm making an effort to counter the sense of self-effort so that I realize that everything is happening by the will of God. Or on the path of knowledge, I surrender everything to nature, to the forces of nature, the mysterious forces of nature, and I just watch. I'm the consciousness. And so until I can do that, I make an effort to do that. I keep trying to place my sense of self not in what the Swami Atmarupananda is doing, but in my self-awareness, and see that the whole universe arises within my awareness. I'm that awareness. I'm the container. I'm not the contained. This also is part of the contained. My thoughts are part of the contained. That's not what I am. I'm the container. All of this is contained within my own awareness. Where do I see you? I can't see you outside of my awareness. Where do you see me? Only in your awareness. So these are the two paths of surrender for the jnani and the bhakta. And so if we understand surrender and self-effort, we find that there's no contradiction between the two. We have to do until the point where doing is transcended. But it's what we do and how we do it that's the important thing in spiritual life. And there we have a choice. And yes, though you may, again, be able to see, if you could know everything about yourself, you could see that there are all of these things that led you to that choice. And so it was not really a free and open choice where there was nothing directing it. No, it was directed. And yet in the midst of it, there is that freedom, that which distinguishes us from the machines. That which is the glory of humanity and the glory of animals and other living beings, that which distinguishes us from machines. And that's why, though someday through AI developments and so forth, machines may be physically more powerful, they will never be greater than living beings, because unless they have self-awareness, and self-awareness is not something that can be programmed, then it's only in living beings where that self-awareness exists. And that will always be the distinguishing factor between the human and the mechanical. And the mechanical is not, doesn't have the power nor the glory, just as the locomotive doesn't have the glory of the little worm that crawls off of the track. So with that, I conclude and say that let us all, in our own ways, realize that we have to act, we have to do. Let us just do it wisely, learn what to do and how to do it, and then realize that in the end, it's in surrendering that sense of agentship either to God or to the grand forces of nature, and recognizing myself as awareness, that is our highest glory. Until then, our highest glory is in the ability to do, but doing in the right way. Thank you. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apas Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens. Peace is in the sky. Peace is on earth. Peace is in the waters. Peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.